Hey guys, really exciting news. We are finally into Unit 3. So, Unit 2 was only 3 videos, and in those 3 videos, I talked about these past extinction events. Now, this is leading us into the current extinction event known as the Anthropocene. Anthropocene, when you hear that word, you should think of anthropology, which is the study of humans, right? So the Anthropocene is this time period dominated by humans, and we for sure are catalysts in this current extinction event. So we're going to focus on this current extinction event throughout Unit 3. And you clearly should know that humans, with our combustion engines, with our just insanely large population on this planet, that we have drastically altered the Earth's atmosphere and many more factors of the Earth. But this particular lecture focuses on our ancestors. So not just present day human has interacted with the planet. Our species is 200,000 years old, and even prior to that, the ancestors of our species, they were cunning, smart individuals who also manipulated their environments. So we're going to focus on humans and the ancestor of humans and how, we've always interacted and changed, factors within our environment. The sixth major extinction event, like I mentioned, is the Anthropocene. And you're going to find a lot of different similarities between past extinction events versus present extinction events. So I wrote this little excerpt. Like the earliest photosynthetic organisms and the late Devonian vascular plants, another living organism, it should be organism, is rapidly changing Earth's ecosystem. The species Homo sapiens. The way we interact with our environment radiates to natural communities. The alteration of many abiotic and biotic factors has resulted in Earth's sixth major extinction event, the Anthropocene. So I like this figure too. This is like a heat map showing the change in Earth's temperature, and this red and orange region shows that the poles, especially the North Pole, is much hotter than it has been historically. So these darker colors show that these weather patterns are not historically similar. They are much warmer presently than they have been in previous times. And that is exactly why, I had this picture on our title page. This polar bear actually does look relatively healthy to me. However, we do know and we should know that polar bears have been hit really hard during this extinction event. Usually when the global climate changes, the poles are the first places on the planet that shift heavily. So polar animals do have a very tough time going through and interacting with their environment that is so readily changing. Quick little run through. We learn about these past 5 extinction events: the Ordovician Silurian, the late Devonian, the PT extinction event, also known as the Great Dying, the TJ extinction event that we know very little about, and then the KT extinction event that led to the extinction of dinosaurs. And with that KT extinction event, we know that this opened up niches that allowed mammals to burst onto Earth's scene, right? So I really love this idea, and what you should take away from Unit 2 is that yes, extinction events, they are inevitable. I hope that we don't go through even a more ridiculous extinction event than we already are, but they are inevitable, and they do allow for adaptations to arise. They do interact with the evolution of species living at the time. So we've learned, and especially through the KT extinction, without that, we don't have this mammal, this ancestral mammal, this egg-laying, squirrel-sized, nocturnal scavenger that lived through the KT extinction event. This organism would not have been so successful without the KT extinction event. We wouldn't have the three groups of mammals arise, the monotremes like platypus and echidnas that lay eggs, the marsupials, the mammals that give birth to really juvenile offspring, and those juvenile have to develop in pouches for several months outside of the mother's body, and then the placental mammals, the most successful group of mammals that give birth to vivacious young that can literally walk and run within an hour or two, right? Fully, hairy, developed young. Obviously, many primates, they need a little more nurturing, but most mammals, they need to nurse for a little bit, but they can already just come out walking, and that's wild. That's just so wild to me. Obviously, a very beneficial characteristic of mammals, leading to mammalian success. Eventually, we get into the ancestors of hominids, and we share a common ancestor with chimpanzees that dates back to 5 million years ago. So it's really interesting if we look at this figure to the right. 5 million years ago, there was a split, right? And we have the ancestors of chimpanzees staying in these tree habitats. But at this time, 5 million years ago, the Earth changed. And Homo sapiens, hominids, are from Africa, central to like northern Africa. And in this area, before 5 million years ago, it was a lush, extremely dense rainforest. But around 5 million years ago, grasslands actually started to encroach on those forests. So as their environment changed, there were different traits that kind of arose in this lineage that gave rise to bipedal hominids. So walking on two legs was beneficial in a grassland versus climbing through using quadrupedal locomotion in a 3D tree-like environment. So hominids, as grasslands came and encroached in this position on Earth, you have selection pressures towards many of the traits that we actually have. So I think that's super cool. And again, Homo sapiens, our species, is extremely new on the face of this planet. 200,000 years is the genesis of our species, which is not that long at all. But throughout this time, obviously there was other closely related organisms. Many of them were bipedal, and they too had large brains, and they were manipulating their environment too. So again, this lecture specifically is not focusing on present day humans and the extinction event happening right now, but I'm first going to focus on our ancestors and early Homo sapiens, and how they have too always interacted and changed their environment. So one trait that is so commonly you can so commonly witness through the remains of our ancestors is the size of our skull, which also relates to the volume of our brain. So there was a directional selection over millions of years to larger and larger brains. The larger our brains became, the more successful, the more adaptable, the better we were at problem solving and strategizing and planning. All these things allowed us to eventually reproduce better, and our population numbers increased. So if you had a larger brain, you probably were more successful, and you passed those big brain genes on to the following generation. This is a directional selection, and taking information that we learned from Unit 1, you should be able to look at this graph. And what type of graph is it? You're right. Exponential. Increasing at an increasing rate. Brain volume increases at an increasing rate throughout hominid evolution. And this figure has more data, has more information involving many more species. And you could see clearly brain size, brain volume is a trait that greatly benefit our species and past species. With our brains, with the ability to adapt and problem solve, we really succeeded. Humans, we evolved and dispersed around the world. There was several pulses of hominid diaspora, or the movement from where our origin was. And by manipulating the environment, our ancestors became very successful. So manipulation, environmental manipulation, is like in our genome. The way we can go into a boreal ecosystem of the north and learn about those cold ecosystems and still feed and survive, as well as living in Central and South America in a totally different jungle system, and manipulating the environments over there, manipulating the environments in temperate systems, really allow us to be extremely successful. And like I mentioned, it wasn't like this is the origin of our species. This is where many of our hominid ancestors lived throughout. Again, 5 million years ago. This was, and before 5 million years ago, so from 10 to 5 million years ago, this was a lush rainforest. Now, even to this day, it's still, actually, this is mostly a desert, but we have areas of grasslands. And there was several pulses of humans leaving this area, kind of colonizing Europe, moving across India, into all the continents that we see today. So we became very successful. And I'm going to focus on how humans interacted with the environment. And these are the main things that I will touch upon now in this lecture. Humans changed fire regimes. Now I actually have a unit on forest management and fire regimes, but it's a great time to introduce fire. Fire is vital to many ecosystem processes over long enough time scales. Humans realize they can use fire to their advantage. We have fishing, hunting large mammals, selecting edible plant species and using plant species for building, which is tied to deforestation. So using lumber to create fuel for their fires and their homes. And then we have the eutrophication of waterways. So obviously humans defecate, and there is a ton of nitrogen and phosphorus in those materials, which caused eutrophication of waterways. So I'm actually going to go through all of these. So they used fire in several manners. The slash and burn technique again, hint, hint, this is a red term. Not only did our ancestors use fire to keep warm and cook, but they used fire to actually alter their ecosystem. They realized that by intentionally burning down habitats, forest habitats, they would convert those forest habitats into grasslands. Now, why would they want to do that? Yes, they get, a lot from forests, but many of their prey items liked grasslands more than forests. So if any of you hunt, you'll notice many people that do hunt, they hunt deer in this area. Deer, although I do find them a lot in forests, they actually like ecotones, which are transitional zones between two types of ecosystems. So deer actually really like the grassland and forest ecotone. So that's why you see a lot of deer on the highway, because next to roads there are grasslands, and next to grasslands, when property isn't maintained, there are forests. So right next to highways actually are ecotones. So our ancestors realized that, hey, if we burn down the forest, we create a grassland, we create this ecotone for ungulates, which is another classification of deer-like even-toed mammals. And when we did this, we allowed them to come to us, and we hunted more efficiently by burning down, by slashing and burning. We changed forests more so into grasslands. Now, slash and burn was also used to increase nutrients. So as you know, there are nutrients locked up into plant material. When they burn, when they are combusted, those nutrients, yes, many nutrients do fly up with smoke and ash, but that ash settles, right? And in that ash there is a high amount of nutrients. So you get, you burn down an area and you increase the soil quality and allow new, really nutritious plant growth. Now this would allow them to selectively harvest new nutritious plant growth, but burning actually also entices prey to come to that area. Contrary to what many think, when a deer smells fire in the distance, they actually kind of migrate towards that fire. Obviously, they're not going to run into a flame, but smoke, and the sense of smoke carries for 50 plus miles, sometimes even more, that we might not be able to pick up on, but these organisms do. They actually walk towards fire because they know that there's going to be new plant growth, really new nutritious plant growth, right? So again, slash and burn did several things. It changed the forest more so into a grassland or a grassland ecotone. It allowed more nutritious plants so they could actually harvest, and more nutritious plants that their herbivore prey would be enticed to. So again, they were literally making their herbivores, their prey, come to them so they could more efficiently hunt. Now they can use fire as a more immediate prey interaction. So you can actually, with our brains, with our knowledge of the topography or layout of the land, we would actually start forest fires and funnel prey into valleys where other individuals of our tribe would wait and then easily hunt and kill. So with our knowledge and our use of fire, we would have immediate fire hunting. They also would use fire and smoke to collect insects. So have you ever seen beekeepers? They spray smoke to disorient them. So they would do this. They would use fire to collect honey. They would use fire to collect termites. Many species, if you basically engulf a tree in smoke, many insects will actually fall down. You can collect those insects, and insects are high in protein. Might not sound good to you now, but our ancestors definitely were omnivores. They definitely would eat insects. Another use of fire that's similar to slash and burn, but is focusing on the indigenous people of the Amazon basin, is this technique called terra preta. So they not only burnt down and burnt plant material to enrich soil, they actually also incorporated animal bones. So the Amazon basin, and actually contrary to what many people believe, jungles and rainforests in general actually have extremely poor soils. So rainforests, like their name suggests, there's a ton of moisture. Rain is constantly falling on rainforests. Because of that, many nutrients get washed away. So even though there's this lush growth, the soil is actually void of many nutrients. And our ancestors realized that early on, if we burned and used charcoal and incorporated and ground up animal bones have many nutrients, especially calcium, phosphorus, right? These animal bones would allow rich growth, right? And then they could plant crops. They could plant, different potatoes and other food stuff to eat, and different fruit trees, and kind of do this kind of pseudo agricultural thing, using and enriching their otherwise nutrient poor soils. So there are actually signs, and archaeologists studying ancient civilizations, they can actually find patches of rainforest that when you dig down a few 6 to 8 inches, you'll find this rich dark earth that actually has tiny bones and tiny pieces of charcoal riddled through. That is a clear indication of terra preta. Many times they use fire as a form of pest management. So fire would actually drive out unwanted pests, killing mosquitoes and ticks. Otherwise, these many pests can vector diseases. So by doing this, they made their lives more comfortable, but they actually also reduce the spread of diseases through using fire. And similar to that, they would actually fireproof their communities. They realized that if you burnt the perimeter around your community, that if a forest fire kind of ensued, it would stop at that border that you maintained through burning, right? Because there'd be no fuel there, so the fire would stop, right? And they would not only do this to their huts, their communities, but they would also do that to important fruit trees. So if there was a mango tree that was just this old growth mango tree that produced hundreds and hundreds of mangoes a year, they would actually fireproof that productive tree, right, to ensure the food coming in. Not only, and on the slide I mentioned medicinal trees as well, right? So if a tree had medicinal sap, they would also fireproof those trees as well. Unfortunately, with humans, warfare and humans kind of come hand in hand, and if you had fire versus your opponent, you definitely had the upper hand. So fire was used in warfare to signal the movement of enemy forces, and you would burn areas to reduce their cover as a preemptive kind of war tactic, and obviously, using fire directly in battle. But there are these two red terms here that I want us to understand. I'm going to talk about them, throughout the semester. They're important. We have intraspecific versus interspecific competition. Intraspecific competition is competition between two individuals of the same species. So here is a cave painting of a human battle, right? Humans are the same species. So this is intraspecific competition. Here we have this predation. Humans are interacting with these mammoths, and this is an interspecific interaction, right? Now, if this is more of predators, so if we kind of flip the script a little bit, and if these mammoths eat a particular plant, like avocados, and humans also eat those avocados, and humans collect more avocados and outcompete this organism, then that is a better example of interspecific competition, right? So it's competition with another species. And for some reason, this helps me understand and just better understand these two different words, right? So inter is like intertwining, and I have to intertwine using two hands. So there's two species, right? Intertwining, right? Interspecific competitions between two different species. Intraspecific competition is between the same species. So past fire can be viewed as a tool, but we also had other physical tools. Really crazy, they unearthed the oldest tools relatively recently. Within the last 5 years, archaeologists uncovered 3.3 million year old bone and stone tools, right? Crazy. From Kenya. 3.3 million years old. These weren't even these weren't even Homo sapien, right? These weren't Homo sapiens. These were ancestors, different species of hominids, right? That were utilizing tools, that were hunting, hunting enough that they developed tools, right? Changing the number of herbivores in their ecosystems, right? That's crazy. With these tools, we became top predators throughout Earth's ecosystems. We've hunted many mammals, many large mammals, to extinction. This is known as the prehistoric overkill hypothesis. Many large mammals have gone extinct, right? We have mammoths. We have this gigantic bear, right? And we have this woolly rhino, right? All these giant mammals have gone extinct. Now, why is there an avocado on the screen? Well, I want to talk about something very important. And, yes, we killed off most of the large mammals, right? But that it doesn't stop there. The interactions don't just stop there. Yes, we killed those mammals. But what did those mammals do through time? Well, they interacted with their own organisms, and they had their own interactions with different plants and such, right? So there's an avocado on the screen. And what is the ecological role of a fruit? An actual fruit, angiosperms, this lineage of flowering plants, evolved this amazing mechanism to disperse their seeds. Many of them engage in producing fruit. Those fruit entice animals to eat them, fly away with the seed, or walk away with the seeds, and then defecate in another position, allowing organisms to move around, right? Dispersal. Dispersal is really big, right? Because if we have a forest fire or the ecosystem changes in a drastic way, if you have a seed that is carried away by an animal, your chances of successfully reproducing go way up, right? So what in the heck could swallow an avocado seed, right? Well, woolly mammoths, giant sloths. These giant mammals would eat these extremely fatty fruits and disperse seeds elsewhere another fitness advantage for the plant is that they're being defecated with nutrient-rich poop, right? So we killed these mammals off in North America. Avocados are North American plant. Kind of go into South America a bit too through Central America. But since we've killed these mammals, they didn't have their natural dispersers anymore. Luckily for avocados, humans really like their taste, so we actually we took over their role of dispersal. But many plants have gone extinct because we killed off their dispersers. But luckily for the avocado, we like them, and we have always liked them, and we started to cultivate them. So this slide is doing a couple of things, but I want you to realize that it doesn't stop there once we make a species extinct, right? Their extinction could relay heavily into other species and cause extinctions of other species. So additional to this is coprophilous fungi. So this group of fungus, they feed on dung, and the Palobolus fungi actually have what's said to be the fastest structure in the entire in biology as a whole. So these spores are launched from these water-filled cannons, and again, this is poop in the background. Like the fungus is eating and decomposing poop, and they launched these spores over 200 G's, so 200 times the force of gravity, and that's twice the amount of G's compared to what a rifle is achieved. So this fungus is still around to this day, but how many coprophilous fungi went extinct with these extremely large mammals? So that's also something to think about. With these tools, we change trophic dynamics in neighboring ecosystems. So another thing to think about is that not only is killing one species possibly changing other species that species interacted with, but different ecosystems, nearby ecosystems too, are changed. So for example, if we fish a lot, right, we remove these fish here, right, we will actually change the layout of a nearby ecosystem, right? Because if we reduce this fish, right, we eat this fish, this kind of looks like a yellow perch to me. If we eat this fish, there'll be less fish feeding on dragonfly larvae. Dragonflies are actually quite formidable predators, and they actually feed on many bees. We know that bees pollinate flowers. So if we actually fish this pond a lot, we increase the amount of predators that can successfully reach adulthood, thus actually reducing the fitness of organisms not even from this system, right? So this is a different ecosystem, right? And especially when these pollinators move inland into forests and such, right? So I think that's a really good example of looking at these organisms and seeing the interconnectedness not only between species but nearby ecosystems. So as we attained higher food acquisition, our settlements grew. Using these tools, we became more successful. We got more food, and our population increased. And what this means is that we have a larger and a more influential interaction the larger these settlements grew. So there's several outcomes associated with population growth. Here we're going to focus a little bit on deforestation. So as your settlements grow, you need more timber materials, and you remove a lot of trees in your nearby area. So here's this picture of I believe this is actually a rainforest, but in temperate forests you see very similar things. When you remove a lot of trees, you'll notice that the surface becomes very wet. And that's because water is sucked up through plants like straws. So water, it moves through a plant like this because leaves have these tiny little openings called stomata, and those stomata, they open and water escapes, and as water escapes, carbon dioxide actually diffuses inside, so you get this exchange and you get photosynthesis, and CO2 is then fixed into sugar. Sugar gets stored throughout the plant's body, but water must be continuously sucked up and in a way kind of exhaled out of the tree. Not really exhaled, but water just moves out through the tree through this process called transpiration. So we can look at trees as giant straws. So when you remove a lot of trees in an area, that water just sits there and it pools, right? So deforestation absolutely changes the layout and the functioning of ecosystems. The definition of deforestation is the removal of a forest or stand of trees where the land is thereafter converted to a non-forest use, right? So this is no longer has characteristics of a forest, right? So you're not going to use it as such. Water pools on the forest floor. Now this obviously changes the plant layout of that particular location. It obviously changes the animals that visit that are indigenous to that area. But when you zoom in to the microbial communities, that also changes. You get totally different pH, you get totally different amount of moisture, you're going to get different decomposition rates. All these things are going to change the microbial community, right? So it's not just the things we can see, it's on the microbial level as well. And when microbes shift, that might alter the ecosystem further down the road, right? It might be if the microbes shift so drastically, then certain plants might not get a good foothold there much later on. So you could actually change the state of an ecosystem that it might never rebound to the stages it once was. Large settlements also equate to large amounts of waste. So as our species advanced, as we developed agriculture and written language, transportation and the domestication of different animals, the first true cities were formed, Now, many times you learn about the Fertile Crescent, including Egypt and Mesopotamia, these river deltas. Yearly, these rivers would flood. The flooding rivers would deposit nutrient rich sediment, and then they would then grow their crops in this newly deposited sediment each year, allowing their populations just to grow tremendously. With that, you get all these people that have to defecate, and with them living so close to fresh water, we cause eutrophication of these waterways, right? Human waste is nutrient rich. This causes algal blooms, which then in turn cause anoxic conditions. We've learned about this in the last unit, talking about extinction events, right? So human populations grow, the amount of waste increase, and eutrophication of waterways ensues. So how did they drink contaminated water? Well, it's also during this time that we come up with fermentation. So yes, can you boil the water and drink it? Absolutely, right? That kills everything, but what does boiled water require? Resources such as timber, right? Which at this time, we have these civilizations, these cities are deforesting their nearby forests to an absolute extreme level, right? Egyptians during this time actually are going to elsewhere to find lumber. Lebanon, for example, Lebanon has these giant cedar trees, true cedars, and ancient Egyptians actually would travel elsewhere to get the necessary wood that they needed. So wood was rare at this time. So they couldn't boil water easily because wood was rather expensive, and you're not going to want to burn wood all the time. You're going to want to use wood for other things like building materials. So obviously you can use other things to heat up water, but they came up with an easy way that sterilized their liquid at room temperature. So no heat required. And this was fermentation. So this probably started accidentally as we would eat bread and other carbohydrates, but mainly bread. It's suggested that our ancestors mistakenly dropped bread into water and let that bread in water just sit for a few days, and the yeast from the bread that they dropped in the water, and yeast again is a fungus that is called Saccharomyces. Sacro refers to sugar, so they actually ferment sugar into alcohol. So the yeast that is in the bread that was dropped into the water and just set aside for a few days became activated, and it would ferment the sugars in the bread, and that fermentation changes sugar into alcohol, and that alcohol actually kills the bacteria in the water. So this fermentation of sugar into alcohol, and this basic mechanism that is how humans brew beer today, was realized. And it wasn't fermentation wasn't first produced to have a fun time getting drunk. It was it came into existence out of necessity, and people had to ferment liquids to actually drink clean water. Now you're probably wondering, like, why are they drinking alcohol? Alcohol dehydrates you, and that is true. But the alcohol in beer, the percentage of alcohol will dehydrate you, and you'll actually lose water if you keep drinking beer, like, today. But fermentation, the process of fermentation, it can only slightly, it can form liquids that are only slightly alcoholic, right? So I'm sure you guys have heard of the drink kombucha, right? This is kombucha, which is fermented tea. And if you actually read the bottle of kombucha, it actually says that it is slightly alcoholic. But you can buy it, right? Because it's the percentage of alcohol is actually so low, and it actually still will hydrate you. Other drinks, I've drank a Russian drink known as kvass, and that is actually rye bread mixed with water and let to ferment. And it's absolutely delicious. Again, it is very, it does hydrate you, and this is how our ancestors that lived in large communities, lived in large cities, would actually drink clean water that was slightly alcoholic. Now, in our liver cells actually produce an enzyme called alcohol dehydrogenase, so ADH, alcohol dehydrogenase. When you see ACE on the end of a word that has to do with a molecule, ACE is usually an enzyme, and it kind of signifies the splitting of another molecule. So hydrogenase, this enzyme cleaves the hydrogen from ethanol, which is an alcohol. So these enzymes we produce. Humans produce ADH. This allows us to drink alcohol and break it down into sugar, right? You've heard of the term beer gut. If you know somebody who drinks a ton of beer, guaranteed they're out of shape, because sugar in beer, the alcohol in beer, your body, with alcohol dehydrogenase, it actually creates sugar out of alcohol. It makes ethanol digestible. Once we change it into a sugar, your body stores that sugar, and if you drink a ton of beer, you have a beer gut, you have a lot of fat, right? Because over time, those extra carbohydrates are then turned into fat molecules. So these enzymes we have in our livers, and our ancestors, our primate ancestors, they too have alcohol dehydrogenase. So why would a chimpanzee and other old world monkeys and new world monkeys have alcohol dehydrogenase? Well, ripe fruits, if a fruit becomes really, really ripe, it actually too ferments. So this is a way for monkeys to break down alcohol in overripe fruit and actually get sugars from alcohol, right? So this alcohol dehydrogenase, it isn't unique in Homo sapiens. It is throughout this primate frugivorous, which is fruit-eating lineage. So as Homo sapiens worked alcohol more and more into our diet, and again, we had this alcohol dehydrogenase blueprint from our primate ancestors who were frugivorous. But as we drank more and more alcoholic beverages, the genes associated with alcohol dehydrogenase began to duplicate. So many times throughout a species evolution, if there are genes that encode for an enzyme that is really beneficial, then there's a directional selection for that particular part of the gene. So the genes that encode for alcohol dehydrogenase over time actually became duplicated. And the more alcohol dehydrogenase genes you had, the higher your fitness became. It might seem unrelated to talk about alcoholism in Native Americans, but it actually ties together exactly of what I'm talking about. So Native Americans that colonized America and the rest of Central and South America are originated from a group or a population of Homo sapiens that traversed through Siberia across a land bridge which was made of ice that connected these two, Alaska with Siberia, during the last ice age, into parts of Canada and America, Central America, all the way in South America, colonizing and kind of staying put. Different tribes along the way would kind of stay put and not migrate anymore. But why is there such a problem with alcohol in Native Americans? There is a 12% substance abuse rate in deaths among Native Americans and Alaskan natives. So that is extremely high. And there's not just one reason why, so I want to make that very clear. Obviously, these people have been treated so poorly ever since European settlers came in and started interacting with them. So there's this oppression, the way Europeans and people of a while ago obviously kind of just dismantled and moved these people to tiny parts of enclosed reserves. There's been all this oppression, so that obviously leads to alcoholism, but there also is a genetic and an environmental idea that coincides with alcoholism in Native Americans. So if we look at the genes associated with alcohol dehydrogenase enzymes in Native Americans, we actually find that they have far fewer genes that encode for this enzyme. So a really small amount of alcohol actually has a strong impact on their body. A close friend that I graduated from Buff State, he actually went to high school with a Native American boy, and they had drank and they were at a party together, and he said that this kid was passed out and he literally saw him drink 2 beers. So not a lot of alcohol goes a long way in an individual that doesn't have many genes encoding for alcohol dehydrogenase. If your body can't break down alcohol, it's going to interact with you much differently. So because a small amount goes a long way, this leads to dependence as well. But why would this group of individuals not have a lot of alcohol dehydrogenase genes? Well, I began to think about, what I know about people and what I know about different civilizations and how they interacted with their environment. And I came up with a quite interesting understanding. So across these regions where early humans settled, especially here in the Fertile Crescent, right? We have the eutrophication of waterways, and with that being said, humans would ferment, water and bread or water and rice to make a slightly fermented solution that was then void of bacteria. It was safe to drink. How would people in this northern latitude, how would they drink water, right? So already they are more migratory, right? They are migrating on foot. They are more hunter. They live a more hunter-gatherer lifestyle. But there's ice up here, right? There's not waterways that are that have gone through eutrophication. There's ice. So how do they drink water? They actually just melt ice. There's no bacteria, so there's not a directional selection for these genes associated with alcohol dehydrogenase, right? Even when they get into lower parts, when they get closer to the equator throughout here, these places are much less settled, and there is much cleaner water to drink over here, right? So because they drank water differently and didn't have to ferment their fresh water to kill all the bacteria, they didn't develop they didn't have these duplication events for alcohol dehydrogenase, which is why they can't metabolize alcohol as much as descendants of people that live over here. Oppositely, when we encode and look at the genes of other people from other walks of life, if we look at the hereditary genome sequences, now I want you to think about this. What part of the world do people have the highest number of alcohol dehydrogenase genes? Just think. What part of the world has individuals that have the highest number of alcohol dehydrogenase genes? Really kind of funny is Irish and Scottish people. So in their genes, they actually had the most duplication events that encode for alcohol dehydrogenase. So the descendants of these people, they drank a lot, and because of that, it was a fitness enhancing trait for you to be able to readily consume lots of alcohol. So I think that's a really interesting idea. So the big picture is that we have changed our external environment. By contaminating fresh water, we developed fermentation. This led to a changed internal environment, right? Different genes encoding for an enzyme that could break down alcohol. Less populated North American settlers had pristine water and did not need fermentation, right? So by looking at human genetics, we can paint a picture of our ancestors' environmental path. So I really like that. We changed our external environment, which over time changed the genome internally, right? So I absolutely love that idea. Our ancestors had this extremely large environmental impact with stones and fire and human ingenuity. Our ancestors had a massive impact on both biotic and abiotic environment. They hunted large mammals to extinction, and it was many of these megafaunal species that too had large ecological functions. Remember the avocado. Now that you know your ancestors changed the environment, think about how modern humans might impact the environment. So I want to leave you with that today. Thank you for your attention. Really excited. We're already in Unit 3. I hope you thought that was interesting. Have a good day, guys. See you next time.